In the previous videos on the megalithic temples of Malta, we investigated the idea that these temples were built after the last great flood to reset civilization, and that they are fertility temples. And not just that, in this video I'm presenting you with the idea that these were also oracle locations and sound temples, and that there's a very specific group of priestesses that was working here and keeping up the temple cultures. And these are what we know throughout mythology, the Megaliths priestesses. These are fertility priestesses and also oracles. And as I presented to you in my video on the connection between the Maltese megalithic temples and the star system series, the builders and the priestesses that operated these temples were of the lineage of the Sophia Christ Essenes, and they protected the cosmic, the divine mother. And these women, these priestesses, they primarily engaged in 3 different arts. First one, they were healers. And as healers, they used sound, energy healing, and also the natural world, plants and bees as well. And there's so much evidence here that these were sound temples. Now, secondly, there were oracles. There were prophets, there were oracles through the day and the night, also dream oracles. They worked with time through the grid systems that are installed here and the stargates that you can find here. And there is again a lot of evidence that oracles worked here. And then thirdly, there were wisdom keepers of womb knowledge. And we also find a lot of evidence here that these temples were also used as birthing and potentially also conception sanctuaries, and that these priestesses taught on light conception and on practices around fertility. And they worked together with the Devic realm. So they worked together with nymphs, but also with bees. And you have to remember that most likely the first temples were built in Malta around 10,000 BC, 9 to 10,000 BC. This is a long time ago. The world looked very different back then. There were also timekeepers. There were oracles. They knew what is going to happen in the future. And they knew that we will come into a time where, and this actually already happened before the temples were built, where the balance between the masculine and feminine broke literally on the planet, and we were coming in a time where there was dominance of the masculine energy. So for them it was very important to protect the feminine frequencies, the feminine essence, to make sure that in the future, in the time we are in now, we can come back into balance. So they were literally also building, working for the future. Now, they had different roles within their societies, within the temple culture. So there were oracles, there were soul midwives. I said in one of the last videos that these temples, the way they were built, they most likely had birthing chambers. And also birthing chambers, again, in the temples, an absolutely harmonious energy was created. And when you bring in a soul into a field that is absolutely harmonious, into an energetic field, this is the absolute perfect environment for a soul to be born into, to basically keep memory as well from past lives, but to also keep a very high state of consciousness from the moment of birth. And first and foremost, obviously, they wanted that was, I said, the people or the race who built the temples. They were a very specific, very highly advanced race. So they obviously wanted to also protect and create an environment where they could thrive, basically where they surrounded themselves with harmonious frequencies, where they were in an energetic field, an energetic environment that basically promoted cell regeneration, that promoted longevity, that promoted health, that promoted fertility. But they also were then amplifying these frequencies into the quicklines, into the water, to spread them throughout the Mediterranean and help to also build, because this is like midwives in a way, wasn't just for their own children, but this was also to basically create new life forms. So they also made sure that there were later on highly evolved civilization that carried on this knowledge and that carried on the science basically of how to live healthy and how to surround yourself with energies that promote health. So they were literally also midwives for new life forms, but also for new societies on Earth. Now, there were also dream weavers, and a dream weaver is a woman generally, but can also be done by men, who literally work with the consciousness of Mother Earth and with time through dreams. So they influence the future through their dreams. So they can call upon, for instance, let's say if there are a lot of natural harsh weather disasters. Let's say there are fires and you want to call upon rain, you can do this through dream. You can work with the elements through dream. But there are also, obviously, dream weavers also means they were receiving oracle prophecies in their dreams. So there is a twofold way how to work. One is to manifest future timelines and to manifest for them also especially the Christ consciousness. This is what a lot of them worked with. But then also to receive prophecies. Now, as I said, there were also Veda priestesses. And this is again works through dream work, but also through other practices. There were also guardians of the crops. A lot of the fertility energetics that were produced in these temples were literally used for crops, for seeds. And there were fertility matrons in a way, so holders of that knowledge of fertilities. Now, they were the guardians of all of that. They were the guardians of knowledge around birth and death cycles, around fertility and around protection. And as I said, they worked with the Devic realm, specifically with nymphs, but also with bees. Malta's ancient name is Melita, and Melita means honey. But Melita also comes from Mel, and that means also pyramid. So we're having an interesting combination here between honey, between the Devic realm, but also between science. And I've told you previously, these were also science centers. Now, Malta is very famous for its honey and for its local bee population. And there is this story around how the temple in Gozo was built, and they said it was built by a giantess who lived off beans and honey. There we have another reference to honey. Now, they worked with the bees in different ways. They also worked with oils as well, with honey itself, but also the importance about the bee is primarily also in the hum, the frequency. So firstly, bees are considered to be a gift of God. They are acting as a messenger between realms. They are a messenger to God. So if you can read bees, if you can dream with bees, you can receive messages from God, because these oracles, these priestesses, were also in constant communication with the highest realms, of the angels and gods, to understand what their mission was on earth. And the bees in Malta specifically carry this, and the consciousness of the island as well carries this very specific fertility frequency that comes from source creation. I will explain in a second how this frequency is also held in the location itself. Now, the importance here is in the Akashic records. They were announcer saying to me, the important is the sound wave, the hum that the bees are making. And there's actually a concept called the golden bee. And this concept is tied again to the locations that have a connection with bees. They had a beehive incorporated in the architecture, etc. Now, the frequency of bee wings, first and foremost, the frequency of bee wings is the same as levitation. But also the frequency of bee wings can open portals. So portals, again, what are we saying? Messengers, right? Messages can come through, but also energy can come through. So portals and people can also travel. And the frequency of the bee wings is 123 hertz, and that sound can be made by a certain musical. It's called B2, and then it actually comes to 123.47 hertz. And this frequency creates a gate, a portal, and the bees were flying in a very specific pattern in these temples. If you remember from my other videos, the temples have a very specific shape that you can find hardly anywhere else in the world in temples. This shape allows the energy to move in a figure 8 movement in the temple, and then the energy is obviously, it is amplified also. So the materials, the stones, and sound as well, there were sound frequencies that were amplified to also move in this way. But bees also make a figure 8 pattern when they are on their orientation flight. So they're using this figure 8 pattern to basically learn to find back home. And the figure 8 pattern, well, we know this is like, it's a sign of infinity, right? It's also the sign of endless creation. But it's also a very powerful pattern that shows us the balance between the yin and yang, the feminine and masculine. It's a sign of unity as well. And actually the middle point between these two circles is a very strong, energetic point. This is the point where you can manifest a lot, where you can have really incredible oracle visions, where you can access higher states of consciousness. There is just a lot of energy in this middle point. And this, when you look at the racial in Mayandra, you see that exactly at this middle point of this figure 8 pattern, that the energy makes, that also bees make when they are flying, is on the lace of the racial grid. So this is basically where then the frequencies sort of shooting into other directions, and the healing that's created here through the sound, through the bees also flying. I am very sure the bees were flying in the temples too, making their own hum, that sound of God. And then the temples, the stones were amplifying this. But then obviously also the priestesses, they worked with sound themselves, with certain songs of mantras that then again got amplified. And then we have the Stargate as well here. So then all of these frequencies that are poured in also from the celestial alignments, were poured in from Mother Earth, were amplified through sound, through the bees. They then these frequencies of fertility, of harmony, of life, of creation, right, of cycles, infinity, they were then being literally shot out to other locations on Earth and positively influencing all of humanity and all of creation on Earth. Plus, because the racial dynamic includes a time gate, there's also a connection here between the Hebrew word of bee, which is bebor or bebora, and that again means oracle. It means also sound. It means word. So the beehive was incorporated in the architecture, and I do know this for other locations like Rosslyn Chapel. I do not know exactly how the beehive was incorporated in Malta, because the top of the temples is gone. They know from small figurines that they found that the temples had, they were covered, but it's totally gone. So, and for instance, in Rosslyn Chapel, the beehive was literally, it was on the roof, and then the bees basically were making a sound, and that sound was then amplified in the chapel itself. So it might have been that the bees also in Malta were in a specific structure connected to the roof. They were flying then also in a specific formation, making also their sound, and that sound might have been also then amplified in the temples itself. They amplified this hum fertility frequency, and then they distributed it into Mother Earth's grid line so it can spread out to different locations, and then make sure that creation happens, that crops, plants grow larger also in other locations, that new life forms are being born in other locations too. So this is literally a co-creation with Mother Earth. Now let's look at some archaeological proof that these were actually also sound temples. So we have in Malta underground temples called hypogeums. And this is known that these were underground sound temples, oracle, and these temples, they are first and foremost, their structure resembles our ear. And they have an oracle chamber. And that oracle chamber resonates at 111 hertz, and 111 hertz is the holy frequency. And that holy frequency, again, it leads to cell regeneration, it leads to the ability to connect to the divine, to communicate with the divine, but also to production of endorphins. And in these hypogeums, also the sound again is amplified. Like when you're standing in it, it's like as if you're on a giant bell, and the sound goes through all your bones. So it's also producing healing. These are sound, any kind of sound temple, we do know this, is also a healing temple. And there are many spirals on the wall. So, and again, the spirals is like this low frequency sound resonance that is amplifying. And we also had water in these hypogeums. So then again, the sound is being amplified for the water so that cells are being brought into harmony. There is another reason here why specifically on Malta there are these sound temples, or there was this these megaliths priestesses that were oracles, and also sort of they were also sound priestesses in a way. And this is because we find Malta is located on one of the oracle octaves, and these are latitudinal lines, parallel north lines, and this has been found by Robert Temple, and he's describing this in his book The Serious Mystery. So he's describing that you have on the parallel north between 32 and 39 north, you have 7 plus 8, it's then the repetition, you have this octave of harmonious sound frequencies. It's like God's harmonious frequencies, his 7 vowels. It's also described as the 7 strings of Apollo's lyre. They are held literally in these latitudinal lines, and the lines you start counting on the 31st, and that actually starts in northern Egypt, Bedat, which used to be the Greenwich of the ancient world. It used to be the geodetic headquarters of the ancient world, and then it goes up into Dodona, Greece. And on all of these lines you have oracle locations, sound temples. You have places like Delphi, which we know again is an oracle location, but it's also a location for sound, and where temples have very specific sound properties. And these 7 harmonious frequencies of God, so when you consider that, you want to restart, you had a mass extinction event, and you want to reset civilization on the planet, and you want to bring also the energies on the planet into balance. You want to basically create an environment where people live in unity, people live in harmony, people live in peace, people live in abundance. How can you do this? You use this through sound. We know the universe is basically created based on sounds. So we have in the universe God's initial harmonious sounds. And when you bring them onto a planet and you ingrain them into lines on this planet, into energetic lines, then they are basically from there spread, and you can, in these locations, you can build temples that amplify them and that then feed them into other locations. These harmonious frequencies, God's 7 vowels, are also on these latitudinal bands. They are also being held in the mountains, in the trees, and as I said, also in the devic realm, in the animals. So for Malta, in the bees. And through this harmonious octave, you basically create harmonious life. Malta is also a navel point location. So all of these locations that are on these oracle octaves, they are marked by a stone that's called Omphalos, and the Om goes back into one of these sounds, right? That is healing for us, that brings our own cells into harmony, into resonance. And many of the places here are navel locations. And one thing I wanted to mention as well is that Malta is on the 36th parallel north, and on that same line are some very other important locations. First and foremost, Chaco Canyon, which is an important sacred site in the United States, but also Rhodes. And then we also have Kunlun Mountains, which is another very high frequency site on our planet. Now, the navel point, the navel locations on our Earth, they also mark very specific locations where you can access certain frequencies that are also within Earth, certain energies within Earth.